Today, I'm delighted to introduce to you Ron Muresan, who is an old-standing student and apprentice of mine who actually moved from Michigan all the way to Oregon, and now you reside in Eugene, right?
Correct.
So thank you so much for taking a trip from Eugene to Portland area. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and it was a pleasure to make the trip. It always is.
Oh, wonderful. The idea of training lawyers in energy arts is rather unusual, perhaps, but I used to be married to one, and a number of my students actually are lawyers. And so it's not, of course, the only thing that you are, and that's a wonderful diversity of interests that you have. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey that brought you to the studies of Qigong in general and Qidao in particular?
Thank you. It was in many ways a gift from the universe. My wife Carmen, who's also advanced practitioner through the academy, had decided that she had had a Qigong master in Romania, where she was born and grew up and went to medical school and was trained in psychiatry. And she wanted to seek out someone here now that we live in the U.S. I was born here. My parents were born here. But and she thought, what better place than to go to the World Congress?
Straight to the source.
Yep, that's it. And that year, it happened to be in Toronto, Canada, and it was before COVID, so it was easy to get to.
It's like 2012, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's almost 10 years now. And so we went, and then as part of the assignments that you could choose from, of the kind of smattering from master to master and presenter to presenter, there was the opportunity to choose and focus on one particular practitioner, and the universe, we kind of chose each other. Carmen chose, and it kind of resonated with us from the outset. And we had a wonderful session. I believe it was at least a half day.
Yeah.
And I remember a few of the other participants, and it was the start of a wonderful experience, after which both Carmen, even though Carmen and I both lived in the Detroit, Michigan area, we both signed up, so we were able to have I think it was hour-long sessions each week at distance, and that was back 10 years ago, and we had telehealth back then, telelearning. Right. And it was wonderful, and we started with the beginners class, of course, and then we went through we visited Portland for the empowerment and the conclusion of that term, and then we went through the intermediate, and then we went through the advanced.
Yes, indeed. And as you mentioned, the practices that you learn from me and perhaps from some other sources turned into like a journey, turned into a self-healing and a self-discovery process. Could you share with us a little bit about that?
Certainly. In preparing for today's talk, I thought about ways in which Qidao has affected me and affected those around me by extension. And as you know, I've sung my whole adult life, probably since I was about 10.
Yeah,
so it's a good while.
Incredible baritone.
Good while. And one of the things that occurred to me is that throughout, from high school all through until now, and even earlier, the teachers are always saying, and the directors, well, raise that soft palate, raise that, this is what we would teach you in voice class if you were a world professional. And I kept thinking, well, then tell me how to do that. Tell me how to do that. And only after we had taken the courses did it occur to me that there's an aspect not only of posture, because in singing posture is enforced, but it occurred to me to smile. Because one of the things that I appreciated and appreciate most about what I learned in the Academy of Qidao is the awareness of your body and all aspects of your body. And I became aware of my breath. And I can explain that later because it has an aspect of our faith practice. Okay. But if you just smile, you automatically lift your soft palate, making you a better singer, but also a better breather. in many of our practices, they say, well, keep one note and sing it as long as you can. And I'm usually the last person singing out of 50 or 60 men. I sing in men's choruses because I take a bigger breath in less time because I'm slightly smiling.
Well, and you probably also know that another really amazing breath technique that affects the vocals is yawning. And if you want to hit the right note, all you need to do is to start yawning, and it will be actually so easy to hit just the right note, so the soft palate lifts automatically, and you also enter a slightly altered state of consciousness.
Interesting. Maybe that's why I was just reading the autobiography or whatever of a great Russian violinist. Nathan Milstein is his name. And he talked about the world famous, to this day, Russian bass Kaliapin, and they used to always say that he was always yawning. And who knows whether it was maybe his secret.
It must have been his secret, because my mother, who was an opera singer, shared that secret with me at a relatively young age.
Wow.
I was going through a music school myself, and I was having kind of a hard time singing in choir and tuning into the right notes that we were supposed to sing. And she was like, "Oh, it's so easy. You just yawn, and it just clicks."
Yeah. Wow. I'll have to start using that now.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, any other experiences or discoveries that you went through as you continued progressing through your self-knowledge?
Very much so. Even recently, in the past couple of years, is now, as you may have heard, as we all know now, sitting is now considered a new health risk, especially if you sit at a computer all day. So I still work, not in law officially now, but I work in compliance, medical records, replying to subpoenas and things at an oncology practice in Eugene. And now everybody has a standing desk.
Nice.
It is, but I found that you can be just as troubled stooping at a standing desk as you can sitting with poor posture. And so once again, it's interesting about the whole idea of formless Qigong and formed Qigong and Tai Chi, etc., because by learning formless, I think I had the benefit of focusing more on my body awareness and my energy awareness, so that even 8 or 10 years after we've concluded or at least finished our formal education in Qidao, I was able to adapt that to realize that when I'm standing, I need to little bit of the tension out of my knees, shift my hips back, and all that thing. And strangely enough, just last week, it occurred to me that by keeping the shoulders back was almost the same motion. This goes back to second or third year of undergrad, when I had to take one phys ed class in college in those days, and I picked archery.
Oh.
And so the whole aspect of drawing the bow almost gives you perfect posture, at least as far as the shoulder girdle. So those kinds of things. I also mentioned, for example, our faith practice, and while we also have had association with Buddhist Lama from Bhutan, of whom you're aware,
right,
and etc. But what's interesting about that is that our metani, as we call them in Greek Orthodoxy, Romanian Orthodoxy, is almost identical to the full prostration that the Buddhists practice, at least in his tradition. So, and one of the most famous Orthodox speakers or educators had said that in our tradition, you focus on the mind, the heart, and the body. And if the body is not involved in your prayers, your meditations, you're only half praying, you're only half meditating. So that really resonated with me.
Oh, it's almost like you forget half of the equation, or it's like if you look at the coin, they're representing mind and body. The heads maybe representing mind, and the tails maybe representing the body. Missing out on one of the sides of the coin would be kind of silly. And what we do is also practice embodiment. So we literally walk the talk. Like, we don't just pray and hope that something is going to change. We actually connect with the way that we need to be in order to achieve what we are praying about, right?
Oh yes, Carmen and I have talked about, my wife and I have talked about it several times in Romanian, which is my grandparents' language and her native language.
Right.
There's actually a term, and of course it has many shades of meaning, but the word is așezare, that you're centered in yourself, you're mindful in yourself, and it also can kind of lead at one edge of the meaning to being enthroned within yourself, established. So, yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up.
Well, yeah, because if you are not established or centered within yourself, then obviously you're not centered. So it's like your physical body doesn't occupy the center of its own energy field. Well, what's going to happen to the physical body if the energy field is skewed in the relationship to the body? It's going to have tension.
Right.
It's going to basically feel like the energy is pulling in a certain direction and it's resisting, it's not falling over, but that compensation creates a tension pattern. And that essentially is one of the main reasons why people experience ill health, energy blockages. So if we understand the root causes of energy blockages, and we find a way to be more centered so we don't create those in our bodies, nobody does them to us, we obviously create them ourselves, just unbeknownst to ourselves. So then we can actually improve the quality of our life tremendously.
Right. Emotional, physical, from the whole standpoint, the whole person. And that's
spiritual.
And I've taken that and I've suggested both the postural and breathing to people at my work. They think it's a little, but the interesting thing is they think it's a little strange for one worker to be suggesting it to another worker until they actually try it.
Instead of an occupational therapist telling them what to do, it's a coworker who tells them, "Hey, have you ever tried doing this?"
The one guy has had bad headaches, and they haven't gone away yet. But I suggested a few adjustments, and it's not as bad. And he said so just the other day. So.
Oh, fantastic! And in the context of helping people achieve that, that's basically the reason why I pioneered this whole profession of Qigong coaching, is that instead of just telling them, look, what you're doing is wrong, you need to do it this way. Most people will have some degree of reaction to that, or they just won't believe you that you are knowledgeable enough to give them the appropriate advice, or they will forget. And so as we help other people discover what would work better for them, we invite them to experiment. Oh, how is this working for you? How much do you have headache now? Now, have you ever considered doing something somehow differently? And I wonder if you could experiment and tell me if you notice any difference. It's almost like inadvertently they receive a little bit of coaching. I generally don't want to coach people who didn't ask for coaching, but if a person is suffering, at least we can help them a little bit, right?
Right. Yeah.
What do you think of the new normal? Thanks to the pandemic, we obviously have a very different working culture. Most people work from home rather than going to the office these days. You mentioned standing instead of sitting at the desk, or not having to commute as much, or like you mentioned, telemedicine. Obviously that has become an imperative. And perhaps other aspects that I haven't thought of.
We are obviously in every week, every month, every year hitting a new normal. And I feel that in so long as it's done in a thought out way, in a thoughtful way that keeps track of the benefit to people and not just certain attitudes, whether of workers or employers, I think that a lot of this is going to be more beneficial, because emotionally, and I think as far as the stress on the body and the stress on the emotions, people are in some ways able to be closer to each other now, because the Zoom conference or the Teams conference or WebEx or whatever platform you use, people are used now, I think, more and more.
Yeah,
I'm a little older.
just a year ago, most people were not really familiar with Zoom or other video conference platforms, and all of a sudden, everyone seems to be using it.
Right. And I think that that's a big plus. I think it's a big plus for emotional health because it's the image. You know, I'm Orthodox, so you know we have a particular approach to the human image and what it bears with it and what the divine image does. But the image of another person, to be able to see that person, it was such a blessing when, you know, telephones, nobody remembers now, but when they came available, but now you can see the person. I mean, we regularly see, you know, my cousin in Romania or my friend in Vancouver, British Columbia, we haven't seen in some years, etc. And it's really a, you know, as much for them as it is for us, a real healing and a pick-me-up.
Well, yeah, and the social distancing obviously doesn't have to be applied to video communications because they can be thousands of miles away and you still connect with them.
And this is just too cute not to talk about because we had some friends from church we have not now seen in a year and a half. And she called my wife, Carmen, and said, well, you know, why don't we try this? Why don't you guys have a meal at your house and we'll have a meal at our house and we'll have a meal together.
And we watch each other eat.
And we talk and we can interact for the first time in a year and a half, really. I mean, at table, which in so many societies and so many cultures is the place where people refresh and recover and heal. And it was really amazing. And we've now quite intentionally started doing that with other people. And it's really kind of caught on.
Yeah, socializing by video chat, I think it's going to be a new normal. I mean, of course, the first choice of mine would be to connect with people face to face. You can actually touch them, hug them, but nowadays people are freaked out to even get 6 feet close, or they just simply don't want to travel. Even if they are on the other side of the town, they can just call you. Why bother meeting face to face when they can just
or dealing with Portland
chat.
traffic?
Don't want to be stuck in traffic for sure. And so obviously, those are somewhat fringe benefits of this pandemic. Another really interesting thing that I, of course, observed, and I'm sure it is apparent to you and everyone else, is that we start paying a lot more attention to our health, don't we? We start talking about health, we talk about prevention. We've been talking about prevention for decades, and suddenly people actually say, yeah, oh, I don't want to catch this cold, I don't want to catch this flu or COVID. They start actually thinking about prevention. Well, and Qigong obviously is an excellent prevention method. One of the things that I know about myself is that I just don't get sick. However often I travel, I hardly ever get sick. I don't want to say like never, like once in the blue moon, maybe once in 4 or 5 years, even less than that, literally. Last year I actually caught COVID attending the conference of spiritual teachers in Orlando, Florida.
Wow.
Either there or on my way back. I was flying with the Chinese delegation, and maybe they were the ones who brought it. Way before then it actually became an official pandemic. It was the beginning of February last year. But that doesn't make me freak out or feel like I can't connect with people anymore because, well, on one hand, I probably have antibodies, so I kind of got inoculated inadvertently. But on the other hand, I think we rob ourselves of quality of life if we create this big bubble that separates us from everyone and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you know, it's the same thing. And one of the things we liked, and I think that we resonated from that very first time in Toronto about your approach to Qi Dao, you know, the path, the way, is the idea that I at least had access to, because my parents were born here, but, you know, mm-hmm. Carmen brought it, is that in older times, people had the idea, and I think Qi Dao enforces it, that you have health and goodness indwelling in you. And that's a normal, when you had mentioned a new normal, is maybe we can rediscover that it's in you already.
Exactly.
But You have to have awareness of life, awareness and body awareness, emotional awareness, when there's a perturbation, and then you have something to draw on to stay healthy. And that brings to mind another thing, but now this is physical, is that, of course, I'm getting a little, with the white hair and everything, as things go on, one of the things we love most about Oregon is the glorious mountains and the valleys and everything else, and the hiking, which in Michigan is pretty boring because everything is flat. So Carmen and I do a lot of hiking, and some healthy hiking, 10, 11, 12-hour days.
Nice.
And now, in the past couple of years, I've started having some very intermittent mechanical trouble with my right knee, and I don't know what it is or where it is. I think it's inflammatory, but when I'm either going up a staircase and taking pressure off my knee, it hurts like a bear. And then it's actually better when I put pressure on it, which obviously is difficult, either going up a mountain or coming down a mountain. And the more technical the mountain, the more dangerous. So it was interesting when we were on Maiden Peak, which is more toward the central part of the Cascades. And it was a 12-hour day, and coming back, it started acting up, and it was not happy at all. But I think what I learned was to be aware of my body and aware of my energy. And suddenly I thought, maybe out of desperation, that I needed to smooth out and try to eliminate the guarding and the tension. And so I almost started thinking of my whole body as kind of not a conveyor belt, but just as movement, that my hips were on almost like cams, smoothing out.
Choo-choo train.
Almost, because it was literally this. And if I did it, my knee felt way better. And the second that I tried to go back to regular walking, it got really worse. So, really worse.
So, would it be fair to say that pain served as a feedback mechanism? The body indicating to your central nervous system, hey, pay attention here. When you move like this, using harmonious culture movement, using more circular, non-stop motions, you don't hurt. Now, when you switch to a less harmonious culture movement, something is not working properly. So in a sense, that might be an invitation to even start applying harmonious culture movement before it starts hurting as a preventative measure.
Absolutely. But only what I've kind of now felt is, it's too bad for those people who have never had access to this awareness, because it can't even flicker through their mind that there's something they can do. It's simply a sense of helplessness, a sense of anxiety, a sense of dread, and yet, once again, I have access to at least be aware, because if you're not aware of it, then you're not aware that you're jamming your foot into the ground with every step and making things worse. So,
well, and also not just jamming, but what you just said, that the knee would hurt when you lift up pressure, which means the pressure was not the issue. Stretching was the issue. And the knee joints are rather complex joints, probably some of the most complex joints in the body. And they can be compressed on one side, for example, on medial side, and stretched out on the lateral side, which goes hand in hand with the distribution of weight on the medial or lateral side of the foot. So if you pronate your foot and you bring more weight on the medial side, you will be stretching the medial part of the knee and compressing or compacting the lateral side, and vice versa. So then what we do is we develop that awareness of center of the foot, or principle of grounding. How can I walk so that I would distribute weight right on the center of the foot, so that it doesn't deviate too much off to the side and doesn't give me grief?
Right. Yeah. Well, and another issue that's coming up is that I am starting to get either some arthritis or gout in the big ball of the foot, and so I'm now tending to supinate, or to be on the outer edge of my foot to take that pressure off, and
That's
maybe
exactly
that's what could be leading to some of this.
Exactly. Yeah. So understanding the root causes is exactly what we do. We basically learn how to connect the dots, and when we understand the root cause, well, of course, we'll be able to address it much more efficiently rather than just trying to suppress the symptoms.
Yeah, but I think that would be an important aspect to communicate to everybody who's listening, the idea that it's a great idea to have, apprentices and full practitioners and masters and grandmasters, but a wonderful aspect of even people who take the beginning, the intermediate, and the advanced practitioner courses is then you become available in the world to communicate some of that knowledge and some of that awareness to everybody who is devoid of it.
Absolutely. And the best way to communicate is by being a role model. So if we are walking the talk, if we're not creating misalignments of this kind in our own bodies, then we can intelligently talk about what we're doing differently from the way that other people do. And so that is kind of a neat way of how Qigong coaches present themselves. They don't just tell the coaching clients, you're doing it wrong, don't do this, do that. That's like patriarchal or parental way of communicating with another person as a child that very few people appreciate. Even if you are a professional, if you are a doctor, for example, or a therapist, and you just tell the person, okay, this is the wrong way to do it, you got to do it this way. Well, compliance is probably one of the major issues, not only with alternative, but also with the allopathic health community. And how do we resolve this compliance issue? We engage the person in basically beginning to work on themselves. Like nobody is going to walk for you. Like those Qigong masters and apprentices and coaches can't walk for you. You have to walk yourself. How you do this then becomes a constant exploration of what is it that I'm doing that causes this? Or how is it that I'm holding myself so it creates this issue? And even if it is the pain in the big toe, for example, often it's not even a gout. It's actually a spasm in one of the muscles of the sole of the foot. The muscle that basically does this to the big toe. It's called adduction. And so if the adductor of the big toe is chronically tense, well, there's a way to release the tension. And the reason why it's tense is usually because it's weak. So also there's a way to strengthen it. And lo and behold, there is less discomfort in the foot. No need to shift away to the lateral side of the foot. The knees doesn't hurt. Everything's hunky-dory.
I like it.
Fantastic. Well, this is something that obviously we can continue diving a lot deeper. I just want to thank you so much, Ron, for sharing with us about your journey and about your exploration of Qidao. And I want to thank you for taking the trip all the way from Eugene.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Mom.